Welcome to the final tutorial set for the semester. For this assignment, we're going to practice making an instructional GIF animation. And I'll go ahead and preview the one that we're going to make. And so as per the assignment guidelines, what we're looking at here are 3 panels or 3 chapters. All right, so the first thing we need to do is to build our assets in Illustrator. So once again, this is going to be a vector graphic tutorial. So let's look at this first one with the hand and the seed. Now on Canvas, you should have gotten this stock photo right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn this hand into a silhouette. And we're going to do that first in Photoshop. We're going to prep the hand, so we're going to create the silhouette. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over here to my crop tool. Again, that's the 5th tool down. And I'm going to crop out this bottom part and maybe move in as close as I can to the thumb and a little bit from the top, and then a little bit from the side, just so we can minimize the area and focus just on the thumb. The next thing we're going to do is to select just the hand. So we can see all this kind of watermark stuff on the photo, and we're going to get rid of that eventually. But I do want to select just the hand. So we're going to go over to this great object selection tool and just draw a rectangular marquee around the hand. And that did a really good job of getting the entire hand and some of the arm. So I want to extract this white background from the hand. Now, if I try to Command X cut, a couple of things happen. First, I get just this red silhouette of a hand. So what I actually want to do is I want to extract the opposite. So I'll go Command Z. Now the reason why the hand was red is because my background color is red and I was dealing with a JPEG, a flattened layer. So if I want the hand to exist on transparency, I have to go over here to my layers panel, double click on the background, and I can just leave that called layer 0 or hand or something like that. So that's the first thing. But if I try to cut, obviously I'm cutting the hand again. I'm not cutting the background. So Command Z that. Now there is a way that you can tell Photoshop, I want you to select the opposite. So select inverse. So I can go up to select and inverse or Shift Command I. And now I should be selecting the background. Command X. All right, good. So the next thing I want to do is I want to make this into a silhouette. So one way to do that is Image Adjustments and go down to this threshold. So Image Adjustments, threshold. And then I have this little slider. And I'm just going to slide this all the way to the right. All right, and there we go. There is my silhouette. And if I zoom in, you can see that it's kind of chunky here, right? So what I'm going to do with this hand in Illustrator is I'm going to turn it into a vector graphic. So I'm going to go ahead and File, Save As. And I'm just going to call this hand. And it will be saved as a PSD file, and I can save it in my assignment 10 practice, and if I want I can create a new folder called assets. And assets are all of those images that we bring into After Effects and then animate. So I'll go ahead and save that and then hide Photoshop, and then I'm going to open that file. And not the hand photo, but the hand PSD file, the asset that I just created. And I'll click Open and click OK. And here I am. So Already in Illustrator, I have this image trace panel open. So to get that to pop up, you can go to Window and make sure that image trace is checkmarked. So in order to activate the image trace, I actually need to select the hand. So I'll go ahead and do that now. I can pretty much just go with the default on this. Now I can't see that anything has changed. If I were to zoom in a little bit, I would still see that the hand is kind of chunky, right? And rasterized. But if I go to the bottom of the image trace window and I click preview, you can see that it's suddenly become really crisp and clean. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. The second thing I'm going to do is go over to Advanced and ignore white. Now, I don't think this is going to make a difference for what we're going to end up doing, but if you were to export this hand as, say, a PNG file, you could tell Illustrator that you want this white area to be transparency. So I'll go ahead and do that just as a safety net. All right, and then I'll go File, Save As, and we can just call that hand AI. And click OK. And there is our first vector graphic. All right, so we have the hand, and then if you'll remember from the GIF, I'll bring that up really quickly, we have the seed. So let's go ahead and create the seed for that. And I'm just going to close this out and create a new document, which I will call seed. And I'm not really worried about the size right now. I can constrain the artboard to the graphic bounds. So to create a seed, I'm going to revisit the shape tools. I'll go down here to the ellipse tool, and I will just draw a really long, maybe like that, kind of a long oval. And the thing is here is that I want the seed to be black and I don't want there to be any stroke. So I go down here to my stroke and fill colors in my tools bar. I select the stroke, no stroke, and then I click the fill color and I'll change that to black. Now you may be wondering, the hand and the seed that you saw in that GIF animation are both yellow. So why are we creating black graphics? And just to let you know, we will change those colors in After Effects. So right now I'm just making everything black. So we talked before about the ability in Illustrator to take these basic shape tools and modify them to create new shapes. So one thing that we did not talk about yet is converting these anchor points, right? So if I were to take my direct selection tool and click on any one of these anchor points, I would see these Bezier handles, right? And that indicates that there is going to be a bit of a curve after and before those anchor points. Well, I'm going to convert one of these anchor points so that there is not the Bezier handle, so that it's more of a sharp corner. And the way I'll do that is by going over to the pen tool and then going down to the anchor point tool from that drop down menu. So I choose the anchor point tool and I get this little upside down V, and I click on this top anchor point and you can see it sharpened that oval right there. So I'm pretty satisfied with this shape the way I have it now, but if I wanted to, I could go to my direct selection tool and I could continue to tweak one or more of these anchor points. So I could take this left anchor point and lower it just a little bit to make the seed a little bit more weighty on the bottom. Do the same with the right anchor point, something like that. And the last part of this is to constrain the artboard bounds to the seed itself. So again, I click off of the seed so that I have the artboard selected. And then I go over to my properties window and click edit artboards. And from the preset, rather than custom, I choose fit to artwork bounds. And then I'll just save that in my assets folder. And now I have my seed in my hand. All right, so we're going to now build the watering pail asset for the GIF animation. And we can see here, I've opened up the GIF in preview so that we can look at just the one frame. So I went ahead and created an Illustrator document, and I've just titled this watering pail, and I went with the default that I created, 1000 by 1000 pixels. We're going to build this watering pail mostly with primitive shapes. And I'm going to go down here to my fill and stroke swatch, and I'm going to select no stroke. And then for the fill, I will have that be black. All right, next I'll go to my rectangle tool, select that, and I'll draw a rectangle that's a little bit taller than it is wide, like so. All right, and next I'll go to my direct selection tool. And what I want to do is I want to scale just this top side down. And I want to leave the bottom side as wide as it is. So I'm going to create a trapezoid. So what I'll do is I'll draw a selection with my direct selection tool. Again, it's this white arrow. And I'm going to go then to scale, the scale tool, or S. So that's about midway down in my tools panel. I'll click on that. And then if I click and drag to the left, the top side gets smaller. If I click and drag to the right, the top side gets bigger. So I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, like so. Next, I need this little sort of peak on top. So I need to add a little anchor point directly in the middle. So I'll go over here to my pen tool and select add anchor point. And I'm going to hover over to where the magenta text says intersect. And remember, the way that I'm able to get these hints is if I go up to view and check smart guides. And it will show me where the center of the object is. It will show me where the center of the object is on top, and so on. And it snaps my pen tool to that. So I'll create an anchor point there. And then I'm going to go over to my direct selection tool and click and drag. And I might need to press the shift key if it goes to one side or the other, but for me it's holding pretty steady. So I'll click and drag just that anchor point up, right? None of the other anchor points are selected. Now I need to round these corners just a bit. If I go back to my selection tool, I can see that these corners are pretty sharp and I want to give them just a little bit of roundness. So I'm going to draw a rectangle with my selection tool around the whole shape. And then I'll go to my direct selection tool, shortcut key A, and you can see these little white circles. And I'm just going to click and drag just a little bit on one of the white circles. It doesn't matter which one, because since the whole thing is selected, it's selected all the corners. So there you go. You can see that it's a little bit rounded there. I'll go back to my selection tool and click off just so we can see that. All right, so next we're going to create the spout for the watering pail. So once again, I'll go to my rectangle tool, and this time I'm going to draw about the same height as the can of the watering pail. I'm going to draw a long, skinny rectangle about like that. All right, and just as we did last time, I'll go to my direct selection tool and select just those top 2 anchor points. I'll go to my scale tool, or S on my keyboard, and I'll click and drag just a little bit to the left. So mine is kind of snapping in a little bit. So I might Command plus to zoom in just so I have a little bit more control. And then Command minus to zoom back out. All right, so that looks pretty good. Click my selection tool and then just click off of the spout to essentially deselect those 2 top points. All right, now I have to rotate this part of the spout so that it is at about a 45-degree angle and it hooks onto the bottom part of the can. I will draw a rectangular selection around the entire spout with my selection tool. And by that object being selected, I can press R on my keyboard or go to the rotation tool in my tools bar. And with that object selected, I will click and drag a little bit to the left and up so that that spout is at about a 45-degree angle. And then I'll go to my selection tool just to make sure it's still selected. And I'll move that in a little bit like so. All right, and now I can click off of that. Okay, so now we need to create the top of the spout. And so this time we'll go to the polygon tool and we're going to create a triangle for that. So I'll click and drag and I'm getting a hexagon. So you'll remember that if I click on the down arrow of my keyboard, I decrease the sides of the polygon. And I can even kind of twist it in the direction of the spout. So about like that. I might have to adjust that a little bit, rotate it, but for now, that will be fine. And I'm going to click and drag that down to the, I guess you could say the neck part of the spout. And it looks like I do need to rotate it just a little bit, which I can press R on my keyboard. And that's looking quite a bit better. Once again, I'll go to my direct selection tool and I see the 3 circles and I'll click and drag to round that spout nozzle a little bit more. All right, good. Okay, so the final thing we need to do with this is to build the handle. And there are different ways to do this, but I wanted to use this as an opportunity to show you the spiral tool, which is hiding under the line segment tool. Right, so there's a lot of interesting little tools down here that you might check out. I wanted to allow you to peek inside this window, and for now we'll select the spiral tool and I'll click and drag, and you can see that I have a pretty spirally spiral. So if I want to increase, let's say, the spiral segments, I press on the up arrow of my keyboard. If I want to decrease, which is actually what I want to do, the spiral segments, I press on the down arrow of my keyboard. So I think that's fine right about there. I'll go to my selection tool and move that down a little bit. And you can see that obviously that's a little bit more bulby than the spiral that I actually had. So I can go into my direct selection tool and I can select these anchor points and also adjust the Bezier handles so that I get a curve that's more what I would like. And don't forget too that you can click and drag to bring the Bezier handles inward. And that lessens the intensity of the curve. All right, so right now this spiral has absolutely no thickness to it. And if we look at the properties of the spiral, right? So no fill, no stroke, and really stroke is what we are affecting, right? So there's absolutely no stroke, which means that this handle doesn't really exist yet. So I'm going to click on the up arrow right next to the stroke, and I can increase the size of the handle until I get something that I like. And it might be easier then to go back and keep tweaking that handle so that it's a little bit more what you like. So I'd like to show you something over in the Layers panel really quickly. So something that Illustrator does differently from Photoshop is as you are building an object like we are here with this watering pail, every time you build a component, it creates a sublayer for that component, right? However, those subcomponents live within a layer, right? So if I import as composition retain layer sizes this watering pail into After Effects, it's only going to recognize this top layer. It's not going to import the handle and the nozzle and the spout neck and the can part of the watering pail separately on their own layer. It's only going to import watering pail. And that's going to work actually for what we're doing, because if I'm creating my GIF animation in After Effects and I'm animating my watering pail and there's something that I don't like about it that I want to change, I can always go back into the Illustrator file and I can modify any one of these components separately. And then when I open up After Effects again, it will absorb the changes that I made in Illustrator. Just as we've done in the past, we're going to constrain the artboard to just the watering pail. So I'll click off the watering pail. Thus, in my properties window, I will be looking at the properties for the artboard. So once again, I click Edit Artboards, and for the preset, I choose Fit to Artwork Bounds, and I will go ahead and save as. And I'll save this watering pail Illustrator file in my Assets folder. And I'll click OK. All right, so we'll create our final asset, which is a plant. So I'll File New and call this Plant. And we'll use this as an opportunity to talk about some new tools. So I'm going to go ahead and build the stalk for the plant. It's going to be a very simple plant with a stalk and just 3 leaves. So I'll go over here to my pencil tool, which for you might be hiding under one of these other tools, but we'll select the pencil tool. And we'll create a bit of an S curve, just something like that, right? So with the pencil tool, there's no fill, it's just stroke. And if I increase the size of the stroke to say 12, I'm going to click off of that. And I want us to look at the ends of the stroke. And these are some very hard sort of cutoff lines. And you can change the quality or the end cap of the stroke by going to the stroke window or stroke panel. So I'll go Window and bring up the stroke panel. And if I have the stroke selected, I can choose, rather than a butt cap, I can choose a round cap. And I'll click off of that just so we can see. So it's got some nice rounded ends to it. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I want my stalk to be a little bit thicker at the bottom than it is at the top. So I'll go over here to this width tool, which is this really funky looking icon right below the scale tool. And I can hover over any part of my stroke, and I'll go down here closer to the bottom. And I'll click and drag just a little bit. And you'll see that now my stroke is a bit thicker on the bottom than it is on the top. So maybe I don't need my stroke to be quite so thick after all. So I'll click off of the stroke to deselect it, and then with my selection tool, reselect it, and go up to here to stroke in the options bar, and I'll click the down arrow, and you can see it getting a little bit skinnier, but it's still retaining that more thick quality on the bottom. And I can keep tweaking things with the width tool and decreasing the stroke size. So maybe I want to go down here to the bottom, for example, and increase the size of the stroke down there, right? So it almost looks like a hair at this point. All right, so I'll unselect that. And so we have our stock part of the plant. And now we're going to create the leaves. So just like we did with the stalk, we're going to do the same technique. Again, choosing the pencil tool, and I'll create 3 leaves just by creating these lines. There's 1, and then 2, and then a 3rd one right up here. All right, so we just have these 3 lines. And I'll once again go to my width tool, and I'll hover over maybe 2/3 down this line closer to the stalk of the first line, and I'll click and drag. All right, so there's leaf 1. I'll do the same for leaf 2, and then finally for leaf 3. So with the watering pail, we talked about treating that as a complete component in and of itself, right? We don't need the spout to move independently of the watering can or the handle to spin around or anything like that. But the way we have this existing in the GIF animation, and I'll play this once again. Right, so there's plant seeds, the watering pail, and then once we get to the plant, you can see that the leaves pop up separately and the stem kind of grows on its own, right? So those actually do need to exist as separate layers in After Effects. So the problem now is that everything is on one layer. So if I were to bring this into After Effects the way it is now, I couldn't get the leaves to pop up separately, right? Because everything would just be on the one layer. So what I need to do is I need to separate the leaves and have them exist on their own individual layers and separate them from the stalk. So there are a couple of ways that I could do that. I could either create a new layer and move each of these components, except for the stalk. I can go ahead and leave that. So I could move each of these leaves into a new layer. But I want to show you a different way of doing that. So in my layers panel, I select this little circle right next to where it says layer 1, and that selects all the layers. And then I'm going to go to this little drop-down menu at the top right, where those 3 little lines are, and I'm going to choose Release to Layers Sequence. And so what this does is this has created layers for each of these sub-layers. And if I were to bring layer 1 into Photoshop, still, because it's the top layer in the hierarchy and encapsulates all these other layers, I wouldn't be able to have these leaves animate on their own. So I actually have to now shift select layers 2, 3, and 4, so everything except the stock, and click and drag. And if you'll look over in the layers panel, you can see, I'm going to do this again. So with those layers selected, I'm clicking, and you can see where that blue line is, and then I go above layer 1, and then up click. So now we have layers 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we'll just identify these. So layer 1, just double click on that, and I'll call that stock. And then layer 4, rather than just calling it leaf 1, leaf 2, leaf 3, I might say bottom underscore leaf, and leaf 3 is middle leaf, and layer 2 is top leaf. All right, so as we've done before, I'll click off of the plant so that I have the artboard selected, and I will click Edit Artboards, and from that choose for the preset Fit to Artwork Bounds. And I'll go ahead and save this plant file in my assets folder. And I did something before with the assets folder. I had the hand.psd file, and you'll remember that's that hand that I created in Photoshop. And I'm actually going to move that back out into the raw files so that all I have in my assets folder are those things that I am able to import into After Effects and animate.